What kind of mind creates a torture device that mimics a coffin and fills it with spikes? The chamber is cold, stone walls slick with moisture, the air smells of iron, damp cloth, and blood long dried. Somewhere beyond the torchlight, chains clink softly, like distant whispers echoing through time. In the center of this darkness stands a figure, tall, human-shaped, its surface forged in iron, darkened by age, rust, and stories no one wants to believe. It stands open, wide like a mouth caught mid-scream. The inside, rows of sharpened spikes line the door and back panel, angled with disturbing precision. None strike the heart, none aim to kill quickly. This is the Iron Maiden, perhaps the most infamous torture device ever imagined. Its very design is theatrical. A death not delivered in haste, but in hours. The condemned would be enclosed slowly, the iron doors shut inch by inch, each spike piercing flesh but not organs, each breath a new agony, each movement a bloodletting prayer. But here's the twist few know: it may have never been used at all, at least not in the medieval period where it supposedly originated. The Iron Maiden may be a myth, born centuries after the age of castles and inquisitors had ended. A dark fantasy created to terrify, to entertain, or to sell tickets at traveling exhibitions. Yet even if it was never real, the fear it stirs is, because in this story, truth matters less than terror. And the Iron Maiden, real or imagined, continues to haunt the way we think about cruelty, control, and what humans are capable of when power becomes the only law. To understand the horror of the Iron Maiden, whether real or imagined, we must step into a world where pain was law and fear was order. Medieval Europe was a place ruled not only by kings and feudal lords, but by the church. Religion shaped every aspect of life. Salvation was everything. Sin was everywhere. And those who challenged the order of heaven and earth, heretics, witches, rebels, were not merely criminals. They were threats to the divine structure itself. The church claimed to save souls. But to do so, it sanctioned extraordinary means. Torture in this world was not cruelty, it was a path to truth. A sinner who confessed under torment could still find redemption. A heretic who screamed the name of Christ as the whip cracked was seen as spiritually saved. Canon law, while initially hesitant, allowed torture under strict conditions. By the late Middle Ages, those conditions were stretched. Inquisitors were taught to extract confessions through pain, not because they wanted suffering, but because suffering revealed the truth. Secular rulers followed suit. Civil law codes, especially in places like France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, codified torture as part of judicial procedure. The body became a vessel to be broken if the mind refused to bend. And this wasn't done in secret. Torture and execution were performances, public events. The gallows, the pillory, the stake all served a dual purpose: to punish the guilty and terrify the innocent. Crowds gathered in thousands to watch hangings, beheadings, burnings. Pain wasn't hidden. It was made spectacle. This was a society built on fear and control, where maintaining order was a divine mandate. To dissent was to unravel the entire social fabric. And so every whip, every rack, every executioner's swing was seen not as brutality, but as balance. In such a world, the Iron Maiden fit perfectly. A device so horrifying, so theatrical, it felt inevitable. Whether it was truly used or not, it echoed the logic of the time, that pain could purify, that fear could protect, and that the body could be sacrificed to save the soul. But of all the devices born in this era, none would become more infamous than the Iron Maiden. It stands like a grim statue, tall, metallic, human-shaped. Hinged doors open to reveal a forest of inward-pointing iron spikes. It is the embodiment of medieval terror, but here's the disturbing truth. The Iron Maiden may never have existed at all, or at least not in the way we've been told. Most accounts trace the Iron Maiden's origins to Nuremberg, Germany, often citing the late Middle Ages or the early Renaissance. It was described as a human-sized iron sarcophagus, its interior lined with spikes precisely arranged to pierce without killing, at least not right away. When the doors closed, the victim wouldn't die instantly. Instead, they'd bleed slowly, skewered through the limbs, the abdomen, and soft tissue. Death came by inches. Agony came with every breath, but historical records tell a different story. The first known Iron Maiden, the so-called Nuremberg Maiden, wasn't documented until the 18th century, long after the Middle Ages had ended. Some believe it was built not for punishment, but for display, a grotesque museum piece meant to dramatize the supposed barbarism of earlier times. No reliable medieval texts mention the Iron Maiden. No inquisitorial records list it. No executioners describe using it. And yet it has become one of the most iconic torture devices in history. Why? Because whether it was used or not, it captured the imagination. It was terrifying in concept and theatrical in execution. A tomb with teeth, a coffin that didn't wait for death, but delivered it slowly. Many of the Iron Maidens that exist today, found in museums across Europe, were likely built in the 19th century, during a wave of fascination with Gothic horror, medieval romanticism, and macabre curiosities. Traveling exhibitions featured these devices as dark spectacles. Writers and illustrators turned them into legend. The line between history and horror blurred, but even if the Iron Maiden was a myth, it was a logical one. It embodied everything the medieval world stood for: punishment that was both physical and symbolic, the idea that suffering could cleanse, that fear could maintain order, that the body was a stage on which power performed its darkest rituals. The Iron Maiden was designed not only to destroy a person, but to mock them in their final moments. Many replicas feature faces carved into the lid, smiling grotesquely, laughing silently as the doors close. That kind of cruelty doesn't need to be real to haunt us. And if the Iron Maiden was fantasy, then what about the other devices? The ones that left behind, no doubt. The ones etched into court records, stained with blood, and described in agonizing detail. Because while the Iron Maiden may be legend, the rest were horrifyingly real. If the Iron Maiden was a myth, the same cannot be said for the rack, the pair of anguish, or the breast ripper. These were real, documented, used. They did not rely on legend to earn their fear, they created it. Let's begin with the rack, perhaps the most universally recognized torture device in Europe. Its design was simple but brutal, a wooden frame with rollers at each end. The victim was tied by the wrists and ankles. As the handles turned, the body was stretched inch by inch. Muscles tore, ligaments snapped, shoulders, knees, and hips dislocated. In some cases, the limbs were pulled completely from their sockets. Victims often passed out long before the confession came, and yet the device was praised for producing truth. Then came the pair of anguish, a metal object shaped like a flower bud. It was inserted into the mouth, rectum, or vagina, depending on the accused's crime. Once inside, it was slowly expanded by turning a screw. Petals of metal opened, tearing soft tissue from the inside out. This device was often reserved for those accused of blasphemy, sodomy, or adultery. It inflicted unspeakable pain, but left little external evidence, a favorite of torturers seeking discretion. Even more grotesque was the breast ripper, used almost exclusively on women. This iron tool, often heated until glowing, was pressed against the breasts and then ripped away. It was a punishment tailored for women accused of seduction, heresy, or illicit affairs, intended not only to wound, but to permanently disfigure. A brutal blend of punishment and misogyny, it turned a woman's body into a battlefield for moral control. Another nightmare, the Judas Cradle, a tall wooden or iron pyramid. The victim was suspended above it, legs tied. Slowly, they were lowered onto the point anus or vagina first, their weight driving the shape upward. It didn't kill immediately. The suffering could last for hours, even days. It targeted not just the flesh, but the mind. Each inch of descent a psychological torment, each passing hour a deliberate deepening of humiliation and pain. None of these were invented for chaos. They were designed with ritual, each matched to specific crimes, each calibrated to deliver shame, not just pain. And more often than not, the symbolism was clear. The pair silenced the mouth that blasphemed. The breast ripper punished the woman who tempted. The rack forced the body to surrender when the will would not. In this world, torture was a language, spoken in screams, written in scars, but some punishments went even further. They didn't stop when life ended. In some cases, death was just the beginning. In a world where pain was justice and suffering was salvation, even death could not guarantee release. Some punishments in medieval Europe were designed not to break the body, but to shatter the mind. One of the most chilling of these was the mock execution. Imagine a prisoner, blindfolded, dragged to the scaffold. The crowd gathers, the noose is tightened, the axe is raised, the final words are spoken, and just as the executioner swings, the blade stops, the blindfold is removed, the sentence is stayed, But the trauma remains, the victim's mind now trapped in a cycle of terror and confusion. For some, the fear of death was more enduring than death itself. This wasn't mercy. It was a psychological crucifixion. Then there were those who weren't spared, but were not left to rest either. Post-mortem torture was reserved for the worst of the condemned. Heretics, regicides, traitors. These were enemies so reviled that even their corpses were denied dignity. Bodies were dug up, hanged in chains, burned, or beheaded years after burial. In some cases, corpses were dismembered and the parts sent to different regions, a warning stitched in flesh, hung above city gates or nailed to wooden stakes. This was more than cruelty, it was cosmic punishment. In the medieval Christian worldview, the body was sacred. Denying burial rites meant condemning the soul to eternal unrest. To desecrate a corpse was to strike at the very soul's hope for heaven. It was not enough to kill the traitor, they had to be damned in both this world and the next. One of the most infamous examples was Oliver Cromwell. Though he died of natural causes in 1658, his body was exhumed by the Royalists 3 years later. He was hanged in public, beheaded, and his head placed on a spike above Westminster Hall, where it remained for decades. The message was clear: the king's justice reaches even into the grave. But even as Enlightenment ideals began to spread across Europe, and science replaced superstition, the legacy of these rituals endured, not through iron and blood, but through myth, museum, and memory. And in the centuries that followed, one object more than any other would capture this legacy. The Iron Maiden. The age of public executions faded, torches dimmed, torture chambers emptied, but the Iron Maiden did not vanish. Instead, it stepped out of history and into myth. In the 19th century, a new fascination gripped Europe: dark romanticism. Gothic novels, horror paintings, and wax museums stoked the public's hunger for the grotesque. Amid this cultural shift, the Iron Maiden found new life, not as a torture device, but as a spectacle. Iron Maidens began appearing in museums and traveling exhibitions across Europe. One of the most famous, displayed in Nuremberg, was presented as an authentic medieval artifact. Visitors stared in horror at its metal jaws, imagining the suffering it must have witnessed. But historians soon began to ask questions. No medieval records mentioned it. No court documents described its use. The construction techniques, the ironwork, the stylization, all pointed not to the 13th century, but to the 18th or even 19th. It seemed more likely that the Iron Maiden was fabricated, a dramatic reinterpretation of medieval cruelty, built to entertain, to horrify, and perhaps to sell tickets. Yet its influence only grew. In literature, it became a symbol of oppressive regimes and merciless faith. In cinema, it appeared as a haunting relic of human darkness. Even in World War II propaganda, Joseph Goebbels falsely claimed the British had used Iron Maidens during the Inquisition, weaponizing myth to stir hatred. Over time, the Iron Maiden became more than just a device. It became a metaphor for systems that confine us, for punishments that dehumanize us, for power that pretends to protect while it quietly destroys. And perhaps that is why it endures, because it speaks to something deeper, a fear not only of death, but of being erased without dignity, of being crushed in silence, in secret, in iron. The Iron Maiden may never have pierced a real body, but it continues to pierce our imagination. A reminder of what happens when law loses compassion, when cruelty is wrapped in ceremony, when myth becomes more powerful than memory. Whether it ever tasted blood or not, the Iron Maiden survives, not as an artifact of iron and rust, but as a symbol. It represents the darkest corners of human imagination, where cruelty is refined into spectacle, where justice is sharpened into torment. The Iron Maiden doesn't need historical proof to feel real. It haunts us because it reflects something that is real: our capacity to rationalize pain, to turn violence into ritual, and to enshrine power above empathy. In a world where people were publicly broken, where souls were punished after death, and where the crowd was expected to cheer, did the Iron Maiden even need to exist? Or was it always just a mirror, held up to a society obsessed with control? Today, its legacy endures in museum glass, in horror fiction, in symbolic conversations about state violence and psychological punishment. Because the Iron Maiden no longer needs a body to break. It reminds us of how dehumanization survives in systems, not spikes. So we ask you, do you believe the Iron Maiden was ever real? Or has it always been the reflection of something we'd rather not see?